So I've been a little bit of a narcissist, and I've been watching some of my prior videos over the weekend, and one thing that was driving me crazy, and I don't know if I'm alone in this, is the fact that my glasses kept reflecting the light. So I'm going to try to bring my glasses at an angle today and see if that makes any difference. If it looks like my glasses are about to fall off my head, it probably is. But also, that's why I'm trying to kind of make things a little less annoying to you, or me, really. With that being said, I want to take a moment to congratulate you guys. If you've been watching or paying attention to any of the COVID-19 news for the state of Kentucky, Governor Beshear has been doing a daily briefing that talks about some of the things that are happening in the state, and the numbers of people that we were expecting to be diagnosed with COVID-19 at this time period is much less than the amount of people who are diagnosed with COVID-19. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you guys are maintaining your social distancing and you're staying inside and you're washing your hands and wearing masks, and all of those recommendations that we keep kind of throwing it at you and expecting you to follow are being followed. So I want to take a moment to kind of thank you guys for that, because not only are you protecting yourself and those that you care for, but you're also protecting me and the people that I care for and love. If we continue to do what we've been doing, we're going to fight this, and it's not going to be much longer, but we have to continue to do it. I know it's really hard. You know, you guys are kids. You want to go out and go hang out with your friends and go play basketball, and you can't really do that. You're making a lot of sacrifices that we were never expecting you to make. And it's been great to see you guys take that and really follow those recommendations and make those sacrifices, and I really appreciate that. With that being said, let's move on. We have been talking about propaganda for what feels like a century. And this week, I'm actually going to be moving away from propaganda just a little bit. And I want to look at media sources and how to analyze media sources. And of course, that includes propaganda, but just media in general. I mentioned this in class before, but I think that it's worth repeating that you guys are the future of the United States. Like, I know with some of you that might be a little scary to think about, like, that weirdo in your class is the future of the United States, but it's true. When I'm old and gray, and I'm in the retirement home, and I'm knitting my great-granddaughter a sweater because I have nothing else better to do, you guys will be paying for my Social Security. You guys will be paying for the social goods that we use on a daily basis, the roads that I drive on, the water that I drink. Those are things that you will have control over when I am past my prime, when I'm in that retirement age and I'm just hanging in there by the skin on my teeth. You are going to be the future of the United States. And one of the things that got me into education, and one of the things that inspired me to become a teacher, was I wanted people to understand how to navigate the world around them. It's confusing. I mean, you can't go on Facebook without seeing a news story that somebody has posted. You can't go on Twitter without knowing what's happening. You can't even really go on Instagram half the time without people, having hashtags and talking about their own issues. We are constantly surrounded by media, and we need to be able to know how to navigate that media and to become productive citizens of the United States. It's you guys that are going to take over when I'm retired and help to solve issues that my generation have done a terrible job at solving. It's you guys that are going to help guide the other generation, the next generation of the United States. And I want to make sure that when you walk out of this classroom and when you walk out of high school, you're going to feel prepared for that. So today, we're actually going to be talking about something that we have talked about time and time again in our actual classrooms. And so this video may not be as long as prior videos of mine because it is going to be 100% a review. And today we're going to be talking about specifically the differences between primary and secondary sources. So let's start with primary sources. Primary sources look at the event from the perspective of somebody who was there. An example of that would be a photograph taken by Apollo 11 on the moon, because the photograph that you are looking at now is from somebody who is on the moon taking a picture of another person on the moon. They are experiencing something that we have not experienced. This is a perspective of somebody who is literally on a completely different astronomical body that is not Earth, and it's the first time that anybody has ever experienced that. So they're taking a photograph of that perspective, their experience on the moon. Primary sources can also be something like an autobiography. Rosa Parks wrote a book about the Montgomery bus boycott. And if you remember, the Montgomery bus boycott began because of the sacrifices that she made. because she decided to not stand up when asked to on the bus and moved to the back of the bus. And the autobiography talks about what led to her decision to do that and some of the ideas and beliefs that led her to actually become one of the biggest civil rights movement leaders in the civil rights era. Now, that's not a diary, but I have a diary here. This is a book called The Citizen Soldier, and it is written in 1894. This is a diary entry of a Union soldier that fought during the Civil War. And it gives you specific dates. So, for example, you have here, it says January of 1863? Yes, 1863. And so it's talking about the day-by-day basis of what it was like to be a Union soldier during the Civil War. So this is also a primary source. Another example is things like speeches. The speeches that are primary sources can be a speech from anyone. From a president, like the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln, and exactly almost to the date, 100 years later, you have the I Have a Dream speech given by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963. So those are both examples of speeches. Primary sources can also be a little bit more specific. If I'm a historian and I wanted to look at the kind of foods that were considered essential during the Great Depression, I might look at something like a shopping list. Because a shopping list is a list of items that someone is planning on buying on their next trip to the grocery store. And we've talked about with the Great Depression, people could not afford a lot. So you're not going to be buying a bunch of sugar and sweets and candies in your shopping list during the Great Depression. You would be buying stuff like flour and rice and wheat. Things that can be used with a mixture of other items to change things around a little bit. And that are cheap. And that can be filling to you and your family. Another item that's considered an example of a primary source is clothes. You can look at examples of uniforms throughout the military history of the United States. You can look at uniforms for the Revolutionary War all the way up to uniforms in the 21st century. And those items are considered primary sources because they were there. And even though they weren't individuals because they're clothes, they were worn by people who have experienced an event or an era in history that you're studying. Another way to look at primary sources is that they are an artifact left behind by somebody who was there to experience the event. And the easiest thing that I do to kind of help me to remember whether it's a primary or a secondary source is I can see it in a museum. 99% of the time, it is a primary source. Letters, buttons, clothes, photographs, statues, art, they are all primary sources because they are all made by the people who have experienced that time or event in history. Now let's talk about secondary sources. Secondary sources is an interpretation of the event based on primary sources. So an example of that would be like a textbook or a documentary like The 13th that we watched earlier in class, a book that was written, a nonfiction book that was written by a historian like Kennedy and the King, talks about the relationship between JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. It also includes things like local and national newscasts and news agencies in general. Things like newspapers are all secondary sources unless the specific individual in the newspapers or interviewed or talked on the news is from the event, then it is a secondary source. The news in general just interprets what's happening. They weren't there when the accident took place on 75 South. They were only using the sources, the resources, the primary resources of people that were there, of maybe a helicopter that saw it or recorded the traffic jam that's happened because of the accident. They were not physically there for the accident. Now, historians look at a ton of primary sources to see any patterns that emerge and make an argument based on those patterns. Let's say that I'm trying to answer the question of whether or not John F. Kennedy Jr. was a civil rights leader. In the book Kennedy and King, a book that I have read, they argue that he is a civil rights leader. There's various connections between him and Martin Luther King Jr. They wrote letters to one another. Kennedy, if you can remember back, tried to pass a bill, the Civil Rights Act of 1963, that made discrimination illegal. However, he died before it was passed, and technically it would have been LBJ who passed the bill in 1964. And they look at the primary resources, letters that were written back and forth between Kennedy and King to make that argument. I could look at those same letters, and I could make a completely different argument. I could say, okay, so JFK and Martin Luther King had a relationship. That doesn't necessarily mean that Kennedy believed everything that Martin Luther King believed. I mean, we have evidence of Adolf Hitler writing to LBJ during World War II. Does that mean that LBJ and Hitler are best friends and that they agree with one another? No. The reason I kind of went through all of that is it's important to understand that a secondary source is one interpretation of looking at something, one way of looking at something, while another historian can look at the exact same primary sources I used, come up with a completely different interpretation. There's nothing wrong with either of our arguments. They are both based on facts. So it's important with that understanding to know that we need to take every secondary source with a grain of salt. We shouldn't take secondary sources, and even sometimes primary sources, as fact, because things are interpreted differently. What Martin Luther King Jr. experienced when he marched down Montgomery is going to be different from someone else who marched down Montgomery. And there's nothing wrong with two different experiences in the civil rights movement. But what really is important for secondary sources is that the interpretation comes from somebody who was not there. And because of that, you have to take it with a grain of salt and use it to compare it with other sources, other secondary and primary sources from the same period, to see if maybe they are not talking about certain evidence that could be contradictory or could go against their argument. Or they might have a really good argument and they base the argument on really awesome primary sources, but it doesn't give you a complete picture. So you have to go on and you have to figure out other interpretations of the event. So connecting all of this to propaganda, what do you think propaganda falls under? Is it a primary source or is it a secondary source? Now I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. Propaganda is, for most part, a secondary source because it is taking historical primary sources and attempting to make an argument from them. They're basing all of their arguments, everything they want you to believe, from primary sources. So if we're going back to the civil rights movement, photographs and videos of police brutality and racist thinking that appeared throughout the South during the civil rights movement are used to make an argument from a lot of propaganda creators that, like, look, we are being treated unequally in the South. We need to have equal rights because clearly they're not giving it to us. We have the right as citizens of the United States to have those equal rights. And although they were using primary sources, they're using those sources in a way that's wanting you to think a certain way about it and to come to a particular conclusion. Most people who make propaganda were not there for the event. Even if you're talking about military, most of the people who are working at creating propaganda for the military, creating video games, have never been to war, have never experienced war. They are only using the interpretations and what the military has told them happens in war. So, closing this all up, what we're going to be doing today is you're just going to be looking at a variety of different examples, and you have to tell me whether it's primary or secondary. And I want you to use this understanding of primary and secondary sources on Thursday when we begin to talk about how to analyze those sources. Now, I know I'm a little bit behind. Today you will absolutely get an update for your grades. I know I've been really behind with updating comments and updating grades. Many of you have turned in things that I haven't updated. I apologize for that. I have just been really kind of ill. I've been feeling much better now, but man, oh man, I'm sorry. What I'm also going to be doing is I'm going to go through, once I've kind of caught up with grading, is I'm going to contact you through email any of the missing assignments that I have not gotten from you. And the reason I'm doing that is because a lot of you guys have been messaging me saying, hey, I turned this in, but it says that it's missing. It could be a Google Classroom thing. It happens all the time. And like I said a million times before, Google Classrooms will be the death of me. And I'm not going to be messaging you saying, like, why did you not turn this in? Because I know that it's possible that you did turn it in, but it just never actually uploaded into the gradebook or into Google Classrooms. So after I've emailed you all the missing assignments that I don't have from you, I encourage you in the next couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, try to get those in for me, because I really do not want to give you any sort of missing grade assignments for this class, and I really want to make sure that you guys are going to do well in my third and fourth quarter. So go in your grade book, look if there's any issues in third and fourth quarter, if they're missing assignments or grades. If you did an assignment from last quarter and it's been a while, send me an email or comment or something on Google Classrooms to let me know that you did it, because when I'm doing the grading in Google Classrooms, it might be really far down in the assignments and I may not see it. So just let me know if you do a prior assignment from before, and I'll update the grade as soon as I can. I think that this assignment is super easy, but once again, if you have any issues with it, my email is open, my Remind Me is open, and Google Classrooms is open as well. So let me know if you have any issues, and I will see you again on Thursday.